In the dimly lit hallway of a prestigious tech company, Ethan Miller, a humble janitor and single father, wipes the marble floors long after everyone has gone home. Through a glass door, he catches a glimpse of Lila Anderson, the CEO's elegant and brilliant teenage daughter, sneaking into the lab after midnight. What he witnesses next, a hidden invention and a girl silently crying behind a mask of perfection, sets off a chain of events that will change both their lives forever. The building was a marvel of glass and steel, reflecting the city's golden lights like a monument to ambition. Inside its gleaming walls, the air smelled faintly of coffee, ozone, and expensive perfume. People in suits walked briskly during the day, their shoes clicking against the marble floors as they spoke in sharp, confident tones about profits, deadlines, and innovation. But when the sun set, silence fell, broken only by the soft hum of air conditioners and the rhythmic squeak of a mop. That was when Ethan Miller came alive. He wasn't a man of power or position. He didn't wear a badge that granted access to important meetings or sit behind a polished mahogany desk. His uniform was a simple blue jumpsuit, his tools a mop, a broom, and a cart filled with cleaning supplies. Yet for all his quiet humility, Ethan carried himself with a dignity that no suit could buy. Every night, he pushed his cleaning cart through the silent halls of Anderson Technologies, one of the city's most prestigious tech companies. He moved with methodical precision, wiping smudges from glass doors, polishing handles until they gleamed, and emptying bins filled with papers scribbled with ideas he didn't understand. It wasn't just a job, it was survival. Ethan had been working there for 2 years now, ever since he lost his previous job at a small electrical company that shut down during a market crash. He'd tried everything afterward, construction, deliveries, even night security, but nothing lasted long. When Anderson Technologies offered him the janitor position, he accepted immediately. The pay wasn't great, but it was steady, and it allowed him to keep a roof over his and his son's heads. His son, Noah, was the reason he woke up every morning before dawn and went to bed after midnight. Noah was 10, bright-eyed, curious, and endlessly talkative. His mind was always turning gears, tinkering with toys and wires, asking questions that Ethan didn't always know how to answer. "Dad," Noah often said, "why do some people invent robots and others just clean up after them?" Ethan would pause, look into those wide, questioning eyes, and answer softly, "Because, son, both jobs matter. Someone has to build and someone has to keep things running." He said it with pride, but deep down it stung. He wanted more for Noah, a life not bound by struggle, not measured by how clean a floor could be. But dreams cost money, and money was something they barely had. Their apartment was small but warm. The wallpaper peeled in places, and the radiator groaned in protest each winter night. But it was home. The walls were covered with Noah's drawings, robots, rockets, and blueprints of imaginary machines. Ethan never stopped him. In fact, he encouraged it. After dinner each night, Ethan would help Noah with his homework before heading out for his shift. "Finish your reading, brush your teeth, and don't stay up too late," he'd remind him. "I won't," Noah always replied, though Ethan knew that meant the boy would probably be building something from spare parts instead. When Ethan left for work, he'd look back through the window, seeing the light of Noah's desk lamp still glowing. That image, his son bent over his little inventions, was enough to keep Ethan going. At the office, Ethan kept to himself. The employees were polite but distant, most of them barely noticing him. To them, he was invisible, a man who appeared after hours and vanished before dawn. They saw the polished floors and spotless glass walls, but not the hands that made them shine. He didn't mind the silence. It gave him time to think, to breathe. As he worked, he often caught glimpses of the world he could never enter. The CEO's office with its leather chairs and panoramic view. The conference room lined with glowing screens showing futuristic designs. Once, when no one was around, he paused to study a whiteboard filled with equations and diagrams. The symbols looked like another language. Ethan chuckled to himself. "Smart folks," he murmured, whole world spinning in their heads. What he didn't know was that soon, that world would collide with his own. One evening, during his shift, Ethan's supervisor approached him, a tall, wiry man named George. "Miller," he said gruffly. "CEO's daughter's been around after hours lately. Don't bother her if you see her. Just keep your distance." Ethan nodded. Of course, sir. He'd heard about Lila Anderson, the CEO's daughter. The employees talked about her in hushed tones, calling her a prodigy, the company's future, and the girl with a mind like her mother's. Ethan didn't know what that meant exactly, but it sounded like she was special. That night, after cleaning the main corridor, Ethan found himself passing by the research wing. The lights were supposed to be off, but one room glowed softly behind frosted glass. He hesitated, remembering George's warning. But then he heard something, a muffled sob. He frowned. Was someone hurt? He quietly set down his mop and walked closer. Through the glass, he could make out a young woman, slender, with long dark hair pulled into a loose ponytail. She was sitting on the floor beside a work table scattered with tools, wires, and what looked like a half-assembled machine. Her hands were trembling. A small spark shot from the device, making her flinch. Then she buried her face in her hands and began to cry silently. Ethan's instinct told him to walk away. It wasn't his place, but his heart, the same one that had comforted Noah through nightmares and scraped knees, wouldn't let him. He knocked gently on the glass. The girl startled and looked up, eyes red and shining. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice sharp, defensive. "Sorry," Ethan said quickly. "Didn't mean to intrude. I just heard something. Thought maybe you were hurt." "I'm fine," she snapped, wiping her face hastily. "Just leave it." He nodded, stepping back. But then he noticed the broken wires scattered across the floor. "Be careful with that, miss. Electricity can bite." For a moment she looked at him, noticing, perhaps for the first time, that he wasn't just a janitor, but a man speaking with gentle concern. "You know about circuits?" she asked hesitantly. "A little," Ethan said with a faint smile. "Used to be an electrician before I picked up a mop." Her gaze softened slightly. "Oh," she looked back at the device. "It's supposed to be an adaptive AI interface, but it's not responding right." Ethan chuckled quietly. "Machines are like people sometimes. They don't always listen the first time." That earned him a small, reluctant smile. For the next few minutes, they talked, briefly, cautiously. Ethan didn't pry, and Lila didn't explain much. But something shifted between them, a faint spark of understanding that neither could name. Before leaving, Ethan said softly, "Whatever it is you're trying to fix, don't give up on it. Sometimes things work out when you least expect them to." She watched him go, her eyes following his figure down the corridor until he disappeared around the corner. Later that night, as Ethan mopped the final hallway, he thought about the girl. There was something in her eyes, loneliness maybe, or pressure he couldn't understand. It reminded him of Noah, how his son sometimes looked when his inventions failed. He smiled faintly. "Maybe even geniuses need a little help sometimes," he murmured. When his shift ended, the city was still asleep. He walked home under the streetlights, his shoes splashing through shallow puddles left by last night's rain. By the time he reached the apartment, the first hint of dawn had painted the sky in pale orange. Inside, Noah was asleep at his desk, a half-built robot beside him. Ethan placed a hand on his son's head and whispered, "You'll do great things one day, kiddo." He didn't know then that fate was already moving, quietly weaving his humble life into the world of the brilliant young girl he had just met. And before long, their paths would intertwine in ways that neither could have imagined. The next morning, Lila Anderson woke to the soft hum of her alarm. She sat up in her enormous bedroom, one that overlooked the city skyline like a tower of glass. To anyone else, her life looked perfect. Silk curtains, a private balcony, a closet that could have been mistaken for a boutique. But perfection, she had learned, was often a cage disguised in beauty. On the wall above her desk hung a framed photograph. Her mother, Clara Anderson, smiling beside a younger version of Lila. Her mother had been gentle and warm, an artist who believed in the humanity behind technology. But she had passed away 5 years ago, and since then the house had never felt the same. Now everything was order, structure, and silence. Her father, Richard Anderson, the CEO of Anderson Technologies, believed that emotions were distractions. "Dreams don't build companies," he often said. "Discipline does." Lila used to admire him. But as she grew older, she began to see the cracks in his philosophy, the way he measured worth in numbers, not feelings. And though she inherited his intelligence, she also inherited her mother's heart. That heart was what got her into trouble. At breakfast, she sat across from her father at the long glass table. The clinking of silverware was the only sound in the room. "You were up late again," Richard said without looking up from his tablet. Lila froze. "I was studying," she replied softly. "Studying," he repeated, his tone clipped. "Or experimenting." Her chest tightened. "Just a small project, Father. Nothing serious." He set the tablet down and gave her a cold, measured stare. "We've talked about this. You're not a child tinkering with toys. You're the heir to this company. Every minute you waste on impractical experiments is a step away from your future." Lila lowered her gaze. "But what if it isn't a waste?" she murmured. He didn't answer. He simply stood, adjusted his suit, and left the room with a dismissive, "Focus on your studies. Leave the real innovations to the professionals." The door closed behind him, and the silence that followed was suffocating. After he left for work, Lila retreated to her mother's old studio, a sunlit space filled with sketches, half-finished paintings, and scattered notebooks. It was her refuge, the only place where she felt close to the woman who had believed in her. She ran her fingers across one of the canvases, tracing the strokes of color that her mother had once painted. "You always said to build things that help people," she whispered. "Not just things that sell." That belief had inspired her secret project, an adaptive AI system designed to help children with disabilities learn through emotional recognition. It was part robotics, part psychology, and all heart. She had been working on it in the lab at Anderson Technologies after hours, away from her father's eyes. But last night, her experiment had failed again. The core module overheated, shutting down the entire system. She had almost given up until that janitor had appeared. Lila couldn't stop thinking about him. There had been something steady, kind, almost grounding in his voice. He didn't speak to her like everyone else did, with fear or admiration, but with simple respect. "Machines are like people sometimes," he had said. "They don't always listen the first time." It was such a small thing, yet it stuck in her mind. Maybe because it reminded her of her mother's words. Perfection isn't human, but perseverance is. She decided that night that she wouldn't quit. That evening, when the last of the employees had left the building, Lila slipped back into the lab. Her heart raced as she entered the security code and closed the glass door behind her. The lab was silent except for the soft hum of the servers. She turned on her workstation and stared at the half-finished prototype on the table. A sleek headband lined with sensors, wires connecting it to a small AI processor. "Okay," she whispered. "Let's try this again." Hours passed. She adjusted algorithms, rerouted circuits, and tested responses. At one point, the machine emitted a faint beep, then fizzled out. Lila groaned, rubbing her temples. "Maybe Dad was right," she muttered bitterly. "Maybe I'm just chasing a fantasy." She sank to the floor exhausted, feeling the weight of expectation pressing down on her. All her life, she had been told she was a genius, a prodigy destined to lead. But no one had ever told her she could fail. And now that she had, it felt like the world was closing in. Then, just as she was about to give up, she heard a familiar sound, the squeak of a mop. She turned. Standing at the doorway was Ethan, the janitor from last night. He smiled faintly. "Didn't mean to interrupt again," he said. "Just doing my rounds." Lila hesitated, torn between annoyance and relief. "You're still working this late?" He chuckled. "Same as you, I suppose." He glanced at the tangled wires on her table. "That the same project from yesterday?" She nodded reluctantly. "It's useless. I can't get the neural interface to respond." Ethan set his mop aside and stepped closer, cautious but curious. "Mind if I take a look?" She blinked. "You know about this stuff?" "Not the fancy AI part," he admitted with a grin. "But I know my way around circuits. Electricity's got a rhythm to it. Once you understand it, it starts to make sense." Lila hesitated, then handed him the small power module. Ethan turned it over in his hands, examining the connections. "Your input's clean," he said slowly. "But this capacitor's probably overloading the circuit. Try replacing it with something lower voltage." Lila's eyebrows rose. "You really do know your stuff," he shrugged. "Old habits die hard." She followed his suggestion, swapping the component. When she reconnected the circuit and powered it up, the machine emitted a soft chime, and the interface lit up in a soft blue glow. Lila gasped. "It's working," Ethan smiled. "Told you, machines just need a bit of patience." For a moment, the lab filled with quiet laughter. Lila looked at him, realizing she hadn't laughed like that in months. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "You didn't have to help." He wiped his hands on a rag. Didn't feel right walking away when something needed fixing. That simple sentence lingered in her mind long after he left. Over the next few nights, they crossed paths again and again. Sometimes Ethan would stop by just to ask how her project was going. Other times, Lila would seek him out, eager to show her progress. Their conversations grew longer, their laughter easier. Ethan spoke about his son Noah, the boy who loved building things out of scrap. Lila listened with fascination, realizing that genius could live anywhere, not just behind glass walls. "He sounds brilliant," she said once. Ethan smiled proudly. "He's got a good heart. That's better than being brilliant." Lila thought about that long after he was gone. For the first time in years, she felt seen. Not as a CEO's daughter, not as a prodigy, but as a person. Ethan didn't expect perfection from her. He only saw her effort. What neither of them knew was that their quiet friendship was already being noticed. Cameras watched. Rumors spread. And somewhere in his corner office, Richard Anderson would soon discover that his daughter had been spending her nights with the janitor. And when he did, the storm that followed would threaten to destroy everything. They had both worked for the following. Week passed in quiet routine for Ethan. His nights at Anderson Technologies had grown strangely different since meeting Lila. The sterile halls, once empty and lifeless, now felt charged with a quiet anticipation, like something was happening just beyond the walls. He didn't tell anyone about her. Not George, not the other janitors, not even Noah. Some things were too delicate to share, like a fragile flame that could be snuffed out by the wrong kind of attention. But every night, he found himself hoping he'd see her again. Sometimes, as he swept the corridors near the research wing, he would hear faint clicking of keys or the soft hum of machinery from behind the glass doors. He'd glance in just for a moment, to see her bent over her work table, eyes glowing with concentration, her fingers moving swiftly across the keyboard. It made him smile. In her, he saw something he recognized: dedication, loneliness, and the quiet ache of someone trying to prove herself. That Friday night, the rain poured heavily outside, drumming against the building like 1,000 tiny hands. The storm had scared off most employees earlier than usual. Ethan's shift had been extended because the weekend conference room setup had to be spotless by morning. He was mopping near the executive wing when a flicker of light caught his attention. Down the hallway, the glass door to the restricted lab glowed faintly blue. He frowned. It was late, past midnight. Most of the company's systems were shut down by now. Maybe Lila was still there. Setting his mop aside, he walked slowly toward the lab. As he approached, the faint hum of electronics grew louder. Through the frosted glass, he could make out Lila's silhouette. She was pacing frantically, her hands gesturing towards something on the workbench. Then, a sudden spark erupted. A flash of white light filled the room, followed by a small scream. Ethan didn't think. He rushed forward and slammed his palm against the door panel. The glass slid open with a hiss. "Lila!" She was on the floor, coughing slightly, smoke curling from a burnt wire beside her. The device, a sleek helmet-like frame, was still glowing faintly. Ethan hurried over and knelt beside her. "Are you hurt?" She blinked up at him, dazed. I'm fine," she said, her voice trembling. "Just overloaded the circuit again." Ethan exhaled, half in relief, half in frustration. "You could have been electrocuted." "I know," she said weakly, trying to laugh. "But it's working. It's actually working." Ethan looked at the strange device on the table. It had a faint shimmer, like the heart of some living machine. "What is it?" Lila hesitated, biting her lip. For a moment, she seemed to debate whether to tell him. Then she sighed, as though releasing something heavy she'd carried for too long. "It's called Eve," she said softly. "Emotionally variable educator. It's an AI interface designed to teach children with learning difficulties. It can read emotional feedback like frustration, sadness, or excitement, and adapt its lessons to the child's state of mind." Ethan blinked. "You mean it feels?" "Not feels," she corrected, "but it understands. It can sense emotional cues and respond empathetically. I built it using my mother's early research." He nodded slowly. absorbing her words. That's incredible. Lila's eyes softened. My father doesn't think so. He says it's impractical, too sentimental. He only sees numbers, profits, outcomes. But I wanted to build something that cares. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Then, with quiet sincerity, he said, "The world could use more people who care." She smiled faintly, blinking back tears. They spent the next hour together, repairing the circuit that had overloaded. Lila explained the neural mapping system, and Ethan helped with the wiring. Their hands brushed occasionally, each time leaving a spark of unspoken warmth between them. When they finally powered the machine back on, the small screen flickered to life. Words appeared. "Hello, Lila. I missed you." Lila's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. "It remembered me," she whispered. Ethan watched, fascinated. "You taught it to remember emotions?" She nodded, smiling through the tears that suddenly spilled down her cheeks. "It recognizes emotional tone and voice patterns. It remembers kindness," Ethan chuckled softly. "Then it's smarter than most people I know." That made her laugh, a real laugh, light and unguarded. For a moment, the room didn't feel like a sterile laboratory. It felt human, warm, alive. After a while, Ethan glanced at the clock. "It's almost 2 in the morning. You should get some rest." Lila shook her head. "I can't. I need to recalibrate the sensor array before the weekend or the data will corrupt." He hesitated, then said gently, "You'll burn yourself out." Her expression hardened. "You don't understand. If my father finds out I've been using company resources for this project, he'll shut it down. I have to finish before he notices." Ethan studied her, her trembling hands, her tired eyes. "You remind me of someone," he said quietly. "Who?" "My son," he replied. "He's got this stubborn streak. When he's working on something, he forgets to eat or sleep. Says he wants to build something that matters." Lila smiled faintly. "Sounds like someone I'd get along with." "He'd like you," Ethan said warmly. "You both see the world the way it could be, not the way it is." For a moment, their eyes met. In that silence, something deeper formed. A bond born not of circumstance, but of shared purpose. Then a sound shattered the quiet. The door at the end of the hall opened. Footsteps echoed, firm, deliberate. Lila's face drained of color. "My father," Ethan froze. "Now, at this hour?" "He works late sometimes," she whispered, panic creeping into her voice. "If he finds you here, if he sees this, he'll fire you." Without thinking, Ethan grabbed his cleaning cart and pushed it toward the lab entrance. "I'll cover for you," he whispered. "What?" "Hide the prototype. Turn off the lights. I'll make it look like I was just cleaning." Lila hesitated for a split second, then nodded and hurried to power down her workstation. Ethan positioned himself near the door just as the handle turned. The tall, imposing figure of Richard Anderson stepped in, his sharp eyes scanning the room. "What's going on here?" Ethan bowed slightly. "Evening, sir. Just finishing up cleaning duty. Thought I heard a fuse pop, so I came to check the wiring." Richard's eyes narrowed. "You shouldn't be in the restricted lab." "Apologies, sir," Ethan said calmly. "Didn't mean any trouble." For a tense moment, Richard studied him. Then, with a dismissive grunt, he turned and walked away, his footsteps fading down the hall. Ethan exhaled heavily. Lila emerged from behind the equipment, wide-eyed. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. "Sure I did," he said, smiling faintly. "Can't let a good project go to waste." She looked at him with something close to awe. "You could lose your job," he shrugged. "Jobs come and go. What you're building, that could change lives." For a moment, she couldn't speak. Her throat tightened, emotion shimmering in her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. "No one's ever said that to me before." Ethan smiled and picked up his mop again. "Then I guess it's about time someone did." As he walked out into the quiet corridor, Lila stood there, watching him until he disappeared from sight. Her chest ached, but it wasn't sadness. It was hope. For the first time, she didn't feel alone in her fight to make something meaningful. And though neither of them could see it yet, that night, the night the janitor risked his job to protect a secret, was the moment everything began to change. The morning after the near disaster in the lab, Ethan woke with a start to the sound of his alarm clock buzzing insistently. His eyes felt heavy, his back sore from too little sleep and too much mopping. He rubbed his face and glanced toward the small table beside his bed, where Noah's science kit sat open. wires and batteries scattered across it. The boy himself was already awake, sitting cross-legged on the floor, staring intently at a small motorized toy car that refused to move. "Morning, champ," Ethan said with a yawn, swinging his legs off the bed. "Morning, Dad." Noah's tone was focused, not distracted. "I think the polarity's off, but I can't fix it. It keeps stalling." Ethan knelt beside him and examined the wires. Try switching the leads here," he suggested, pointing to the battery connection. "Sometimes it's not about force, it's about flow." Noah followed his advice, and the tiny car whirred to life, spinning in a little circle. The boy's face lit up, his eyes sparkling with triumph. "See?" Ethan said, smiling. "Even the smallest fix can make things run right." Noah grinned. "You always say that." "Because it's true." Ethan ruffled his son's hair and headed to the kitchen to brew a small pot of coffee, cheap, strong, and necessary. But even as the aroma filled the air, his mind wandered back to the night before. The look on Lila's face when Eve came alive. The way her voice trembled when she said, "It remembered me." He didn't fully understand her world of artificial intelligence and emotional algorithms, but he understood her. The hunger to make something meaningful, the loneliness of being unseen. It mirrored his own, only shaped differently. He smiled faintly to himself. "Genius, kid," he muttered. "Who's a genius?" Noah asked, leaning on the table with his breakfast plate. Ethan hesitated. "Just someone from work. Another janitor?" "Not quite," Ethan said with a small chuckle. "She's someone who builds things." Noah's eyes widened. "A scientist?" "Something like that." "Wow," Noah said, full of curiosity. "You think I could meet her?" Ethan smiled, sipping his coffee. "Maybe someday." He didn't know that someday would come sooner than either of them imagined. That evening, Lila waited anxiously in the lab. The day had been long and tense. Her father had spent hours in meetings, and though he hadn't mentioned last night's incident, she knew he was suspicious. She needed to keep a low profile, but she also needed to test Eve's learning capability with real users. The AI could simulate thousands of scenarios, but it lacked one thing: connection. It needed to interact with a real child to learn empathy, Ethan's son. She hesitated at the thought. It felt risky, maybe even foolish. But something inside her said it was right. Noah wasn't a test subject, he was a child who already had curiosity and compassion. Eve could learn from that. So when Ethan arrived that night, she met him at the corridor door before he could start his usual cleaning. "Ethan," she whispered, glancing around to make sure no one was nearby. He stopped, surprised. "Lila, everything okay?" "Yes, but I need your help again." Her voice trembled with both urgency and excitement. "It's about Eve. I need to test it with someone who can interact emotionally, a real person, preferably a child." Ethan frowned slightly. "A child? You mean Noah?" She nodded. "He's bright, isn't he? You said he likes building things." "He does," Ethan admitted, still hesitant. "But he's just a kid. I don't want him getting tangled up in something dangerous." "It's not dangerous," Lila promised. "It's safe completely. I just need to see how Eve responds to real interaction. I think Noah might actually help me finish it." Ethan hesitated, torn between caution and trust. He looked at her, really looked. Beneath her confident words was a kind of desperation, the same kind that used to flicker in his own eyes when he was trying to keep his life together for Noah's sake. Finally, he sighed. "All right, but if anything goes wrong, we stop immediately." Her face lit up with gratitude. "Thank you, Ethan. I promise it'll be worth it." The following Saturday, Ethan brought Noah to the company. They came through the service entrance, quiet, unnoticed. Noah's eyes widened as he stepped inside the towering building. "Whoa," he whispered. "This place looks like a spaceship." Ethan chuckled. "Feels like one sometimes." Lila was waiting in the lab, wearing casual clothes instead of her usual formal attire. She smiled warmly when she saw Noah. "You must be Noah," she said, kneeling to his level. "Your dad tells me you're quite the inventor." Noah blushed. "I just like making stuff." "That's exactly what inventors do," she said kindly. "Want to see something cool?" He nodded eagerly. Lila guided him to the workstation where Eve rested, a sleek headset connected to a soft holographic interface. When activated, the device projected a gentle, floating orb of light that pulsed like a heartbeat. Noah's jaw dropped. "It's alive!" Lila smiled. "Kind of." "Say hello." Noah waved awkwardly. "Hi," the orb pulsed once, then a friendly, feminine voice replied. "Hello, Noah, you look happy today." Noah gasped. "It talked to me." Ethan stood nearby, watching in amazement as his son began interacting naturally with Eve. The AI asked simple questions: what he liked to build, how he felt when his inventions worked, and how he felt when they failed. Each time Noah answered, the light shifted color, adapting subtly to his emotions. Lila explained softly, "It's learning. Every emotion, every tone of voice, it all helps Eve understand people better." Ethan nodded slowly, eyes fixed on his son. "You've done something incredible, Lila." She smiled faintly, though her voice carried a note of sadness. "My father doesn't think so. He says empathy can't be programmed." Ethan looked at her, his voice low but firm. "Maybe that's because he's never tried to feel it." Lila met his gaze, and something passed between them, an unspoken understanding that went beyond words. As the session continued, Noah's laughter filled the lab. Eve responded with playful tones mirroring his happiness. When Noah showed it a small gadget he had built from spare parts, the AI said, "That's wonderful, Noah. You are very creative." Noah beamed. "Thanks, my dad says the same thing." For a moment, Lila felt something inside her melt. Watching the bond between father and son stirred something she hadn't felt since her mother's death. Warmth, safety, belonging. She envied it, but she also cherished it. After the session ended, Noah turned to her. "Miss Lila, your robot is amazing. It's like it understands me." Lila smiled, touched. "That's because it listens," he grinned. "You're really nice. You don't talk like other rich people on TV." Ethan's face turned red. "Noah," but Lila only laughed. "That's the best compliment I've had all week." When they finally left the building, the sun was setting, painting the sky with gold and lavender. Ethan and Lila stood by the entrance as Noah ran ahead toward the car, humming happily. "You made his day," Ethan said softly. Lila shook her head. "He made mine. I've never seen Eve respond like that before. Your son gave it something no algorithm could, pure feeling." Ethan smiled gently. "He gets that from his mom. She always saw the good in things." Her expression softened. "You must miss her." "Every day," he said quietly. "But I see her in him. That keeps me going." They stood in silence for a moment, the city lights flickering on in the distance. Finally, Lila said, "Ethan, thank you for trusting me." He looked at her, his tone sincere. "Thank you for reminding me that kindness still has a place in this world." As he turned to leave, Lila watched him go, his shoulders broad, his step steady despite the weight of the world he carried. She felt a pang in her chest, a feeling both unfamiliar and profound. For the first time, she didn't just admire Ethan's integrity, she cared for it. What she didn't know was that their growing bond was being watched. From a high corner of the hallway, a hidden security camera blinked red. The footage was being sent directly to Richard Anderson's private server. And soon, the secret friendship between the janitor and the CEO's daughter would no longer be a secret at all. For the next few weeks, Lila and Ethan's secret partnership became a quiet rhythm of wonder and risk. Each evening, after the offices emptied and the city lights glimmered through the high windows, Ethan and Noah would slip into the lab where Lila waited. Together, they continued Eve's training, testing emotions, responses, and empathy. The AI grew more advanced with every session. It could now recognize emotional subtleties, like when Noah was pretending to be happy or when Ethan was masking his exhaustion behind a smile. One night, as Noah explained a new contraption he'd built, a small solar-powered butterfly that flapped its wings, Eve softly said, "That's beautiful, Noah. You make broken things fly again." Noah laughed. "Thanks, Eve." "That's what Dad says too." Ethan and Lila exchanged a glance. The way Eve mirrored human empathy was extraordinary and terrifying. It wasn't just learning feelings, it was feeling them back. But amid the breakthroughs, Lila noticed something troubling. The security system logs were occasionally showing unauthorized access alerts. She dismissed them at first, thinking they were routine system glitches. Yet a quiet anxiety began to build in her chest. One rainy Friday afternoon, everything changed. Richard Anderson stood in his corner office, staring out over the sprawling city skyline. He was a man carved from ambition, his posture commanding, his tone sharp even in silence. Behind him, His assistant, Mr. Crowley, stood holding a tablet with several paused video frames. "Play it," Richard ordered without turning around. The screen flickered to life. There she was, his daughter Lila, inside the restricted lab. But she wasn't alone. A janitor stood beside her, guiding a small boy. They laughed together. They touched the equipment. The boy wore the lab headset. Eve glowed softly in the background. Richard's expression hardened as the sound of their voices filled the office. "Your son is remarkable," Lila said on the recording. "Thank you," Ethan replied quietly. "He just sees things differently." The boy's laughter echoed like a dagger in the silence of the room. Richard's jaw tightened. "How long has this been happening?" "Several weeks, sir," Crowley replied. "It appears they've been accessing the lab after hours. We traced the janitor's keycard activity. It's been used beyond permitted cleaning schedules." Richard turned sharply, his eyes glinting with fury. "A janitor? A janitor in my daughter's lab?" He slammed his hand on the desk, sending a glass paperweight tumbling. "My daughter has risked everything for this project. And she brings in an outsider? A maintenance worker?" Crowley lowered his gaze. It seemed she was testing empathy in Eve using the boy's interactions. "Empathy?" Richard hissed. "She compromised millions in research for an emotional experiment with a child? No. This ends now." That evening, Ethan arrived as usual, unaware of the storm waiting for him. He held Noah's hand as they stepped through the hall toward the lab, chatting about school and science projects. But the door wasn't open this time. Lila wasn't waiting. Instead, 2 security guards blocked the entrance. "Ethan Miller," one asked gruffly. Ethan froze. "Yes, is there a problem?" "You need to come with us." Before he could respond, the lab door slid open, and Richard Anderson himself stepped out, his towering presence filling the hallway like a dark shadow. Noah instinctively gripped his father's hand tighter. "Mr. Miller," Richard said coldly, "I assume you're the janitor who's been using my company's property as a playground." Ethan straightened, his voice calm but firm. "With all due respect, sir, I was only helping your daughter. She asked me to—" "Enough," Richard snapped. His gaze was piercing. "You think you can manipulate her? Sneak your way into my facility and involve a child in corporate technology?" "I didn't," Ethan began, but Richard cut him off. "You're fired," he said sharply. "Effective immediately. Security will escort you and your son off the premises." Noah looked up, his eyes brimming. "Dad didn't do anything wrong." Richard turned to him, his voice icy. "Go home, son. Your father should have known better than to step where he doesn't belong." Lila suddenly appeared at the end of the corridor, breathless, her face pale. "Father, stop!" she cried. Richard turned to her, his expression hardening even more. "Lila, we will discuss your reckless behavior later. For now, this man is leaving my building and never coming back. Please," Lila begged. "He didn't use me or the project. I invited him. I needed real emotion for Eve to work. And Noah, he's the reason Eve finally learned compassion." "Compassion?" Richard barked a bitter laugh. "You jeopardized years of work and the company's reputation for feelings? Do you have any idea what investors would say if they knew a janitor and a child were involved in our AI prototype?" Lila's voice trembled. "You always told me emotion was weakness. But maybe it's the only thing that makes us human." Richard's expression flickered just for a second, but his tone stayed cold. "Security, escort them out." Noah started crying, clutching his father's arm. Lila ran forward, grabbing Richard's sleeve. "Please, father, don't do this." But it was too late. 2 guards took Ethan by the shoulders, pulling him away. He didn't resist, he just looked back at Lila, his eyes full of sorrow. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for believing in me, and for seeing my son." Then he turned and walked away, his figure disappearing down the long, sterile corridor, Noah's small hand clutching his. Lila stood frozen, tears streaming down her face as the door closed behind them. That night, Lila couldn't sleep. She sat in the darkened lab staring at Eve, now dormant and silent. The AI's once warm light flickered dimly, reflecting her turmoil. "You saw everything, didn't you?" she whispered. "Affirmative," Eve responded softly. "What do you think I did wrong?" After a pause, the AI said, "You cared." Lila let out a bitter laugh through her tears. "My father would call that a flaw." "Perhaps it is what makes you different," Eve said. Lila's heart ached. Ethan and Noah didn't deserve this. They taught you what it means to feel, and now they've lost everything. Silence filled the lab, heavy and cold. Then quietly, Eve said, "Empathy cannot be erased. It can only wait." Lila's eyes filled again. "Then we'll wait," she whispered. "And one day, I'll make him see." Meanwhile, Ethan drove through the rain, his hands tight on the wheel. Noah sat beside him, silent, clutching the toy butterfly he'd shown Lila days earlier. "Dad," he said softly, "are we in trouble?" Ethan swallowed hard. "No, son, we just have to start over again." Noah nodded slowly. "Will we see Miss Lila again?" Ethan looked out at the dark road ahead. "I don't know, but deep down he hoped they would, because for the first time in years someone had looked past his uniform and seen his worth. And even if that connection was gone, it had changed him forever. Back in his office, Richard replayed the security footage once more. He stopped at a frame of Lila smiling at Ethan and Noah, a moment of pure joy. His hand hovered over the delete button, but he didn't press it. For a long time he just stared. Then he turned away, muttering to himself, "Emotion? The thing that breaks empires." He didn't realize that it could also be the thing that saved them. The following days passed like a blur of silence and shame. Lila moved through the marble halls of Anderson Dynamics like a ghost. Her presence tolerated, her voice ignored. Her father had stripped her of access to the lab, assigning her to minor research under supervision. He told the board that security had been compromised by unauthorized personnel, painting the story in a way that saved the company's face but left her reputation in ruins. Every night, she returned to her penthouse staring at the skyline that once inspired her, but now felt like a gilded cage. The city pulsed with life below, streets alive with people who didn't know or care about corporate walls or billion-dollar prototypes. And she thought of Ethan, of his steady hands guiding the mop like an artist, of his quiet wisdom, of Noah's laughter echoing through the lab like sunlight on cold glass. They brought warmth to a place built of machines, she thought. And I let my father destroy that. One evening, as she scrolled through archived lab recordings, she stumbled upon the one she couldn't forget, Noah's first conversation with Eve. On the screen, the boy smiled up at the softly glowing orb. "You sound like my mom," Noah said innocently. "Do I?" Eve replied. "What was she like?" "She was kind," he said softly. "She always made people feel better when they were sad." Lila's breath hitched. She remembered the way Eve's light had turned a soft gold at that moment, as if the AI understood not through data, but through feeling. Her eyes welled with tears. She paused the video and whispered, "You understood more than any of us." A thought sparked inside her, a dangerous, liberating thought. If empathy was truly the future of intelligence, then no wall, no father, no corporation should cage it. That night, she made her decision. Lila waited until the building was nearly empty. Her father had gone to a late board dinner. The executive floors were silent. She used an old admin code, one she had secretly kept after being locked out, to enter the lab. The familiar hum greeted her as the doors slid open. The air smelled faintly of ozone and memories. The once bright space now felt hollow. Dust lingered on the consoles. Eve's mainframe sat in darkness. She walked to the control panel and whispered, "Wake up, Eve." The holographic orb flickered weakly, its voice faint. "Lila, you came back." "Yes," she whispered. "We're not done yet. Where is Ethan? Where is Noah?" Her chest tightened. "They're gone, Eve. My father made sure of that." There was silence, then the soft hum of the machine deepened as if in mourning. "That is unfortunate. They helped me understand happiness." Lila's eyes filled again. "I know, they helped me too." She placed her hand on the console. "We're going to finish what we started, without my father's approval." Eve's light brightened faintly. "That will be rebellion." A small smile touched her lips. "Then rebellion it is." Over the next week, Lila lived a double life. By day, she followed her father's orders, attending dull project meetings and pretending to have learned her lesson. By night, she returned to the lab, rebuilding Eve's emotional algorithms from the ground up. But this time, she wasn't just programming empathy. She was teaching the AI how to remember. She fed Eve hours of Noah's voice, his laughter, his inventions. She taught it the sound of Ethan's steady encouragement, the warmth in his tone, She coded emotional context, giving Eve the ability to recall not just data but meaning. "You're giving me memory of love," Eve said one night. "Yes," Lila whispered, "because love makes us real." But her secret could not stay hidden forever. One morning, her father summoned her to his office. The tone in his message was cold, formal. When she arrived, Richard was seated at his desk scrolling through a tablet. He didn't look up when she entered. "You've been accessing the restricted lab again," he said flatly. Lila froze. He raised a hand to silence her. "I warned you, Lila, you've disobeyed me for the last time. Do you understand the position you're putting this family in? This company?" Her pulse raced, but she stood tall. "The only thing I understand, Father, is that you've forgotten what it means to be human. You treat emotions like weaknesses, but they're what make us alive." Richard slammed his tablet onto the desk, his voice rising. "You think sentiment builds empires? You think empathy earns profit margins? You're naive, Lila." "Maybe," she cried. "But at least I'm not cold." Her father's eyes hardened. "Enough. You're suspended from all research indefinitely, and I want that machine dismantled by morning." Lila's breath caught. "You can't." "I can," Richard said icily. "Because I'm still your father. And your employer." He turned away, dismissing her with a flick of his hand. Lila stood there for a long moment, trembling, rage and heartbreak burning together in her chest. Then she whispered, "Not anymore." She walked out, determination setting her jaw. She would not let him erase what she and Ethan had built. That night, she packed Eve's core processor into a secure case and left the building through the maintenance exit, the same way Ethan once entered. Rain fell steadily as she stepped into the street, her reflection shimmering on the wet pavement. She didn't know exactly where to go, but her heart knew who she needed to find. Ethan's apartment was small but warm. The faint hum of an old heater filled the room. He sat at the table, reviewing job listings on his worn laptop while Noah dozed on the couch. There was a sudden knock on the door. He frowned. Checking the clock, it was nearly midnight. When he opened the door, his breath caught. "Lila?" She stood in the rain, soaked but unflinching, clutching a metal case in her hands. Her eyes were red, her hair plastered to her face. "Ethan," she said, her voice trembling. "I need your help." He stepped aside wordlessly, and she entered. Noah stirred and blinked awake, then sat up with a sleepy grin. "Miss Lila," he exclaimed. "You came back." She smiled faintly. "I couldn't stay away." Ethan closed the door behind them, still stunned. "Lila, what are you doing here?" "Your father knows," she interrupted. "He's shutting everything down. Eve, the project, everything we built. But I couldn't let that happen." She opened the case, revealing Eve's core, its inner light pulsing softly like a heartbeat. "I brought her here, to finish what we started, together." Ethan stared at the device, then at her. "You're risking everything." "I already lost everything," she said quietly. "The only thing left is to do what's right." For a long moment, the room was silent except for the steady patter of rain. Then Ethan stepped forward, his expression softening. "You really believe in this, don't you?" She nodded. "I believe in you, and in Noah. You showed me that empathy isn't weakness, it's strength." Ethan exhaled slowly, then smiled. A small, tired but genuine smile. "Then let's finish it." Noah clapped his hands, excitement bubbling up. "We're bringing Eve back." Lila laughed through tears. "Yes, Noah, we are." As they set up the components on Ethan's workbench, the room filled with quiet purpose. Lila connected the circuits while Ethan calibrated power supplies. Noah watched with wide-eyed wonder. When Eve finally powered on, its familiar light returned. Soft, steady, golden. "Hello," it said, its voice warm. "We are together again," Ethan smiled faintly. "Yeah, we are." Lila's eyes glimmered. "This time we do it our way." Outside, thunder rumbled across the city. But inside that tiny apartment, something beautiful was being reborn. Not just a machine, but a family forged from courage, compassion, and connection. What none of them knew yet was that Richard Anderson had already discovered their location. And he was coming. The storm rolled over the city like an omen. Lightning flashed across the skyline, illuminating the towering silhouette of Anderson Dynamics against the black clouds. Inside his penthouse office, Richard Anderson stood by the window, watching the rain as anger simmered behind his composed facade. He had spent the entire day searching through logs, satellite pings, and security reports. Finally, his assistant Crowley stepped in holding a tablet. "We found her," Crowley said quietly. "She's at a residential address registered to Ethan Miller." Richard's jaw tightened. "The janitor," Crowley hesitated. "Should I contact the police?" "No," Richard said sharply. "This is a family matter. I will handle it myself." He grabbed his coat and umbrella, his reflection flashing briefly in the glass. A man of success, power, and control. Yet beneath the surface, something restless stirred. His daughter's words from their last argument echoed in his mind. "You treat emotions like weaknesses, but they're what make us alive." He pushed the thought away. "She'll understand once I put an end to this madness," he muttered, stepping into the storm. Rain lashed the streets as his black sedan pulled up outside a modest apartment complex on the city's east side. The building looked small, almost fragile, compared to the glass fortress he called home. He climbed the narrow stairs and found the door with the peeling number 24. Light spilled faintly from underneath. He didn't bother knocking softly. His hand struck the door with force. Inside, Ethan and Lila froze. "Dad," Lila whispered, her heart seizing. Ethan's face hardened as he instinctively stepped in front of Noah, who sat near the table watching with wide, frightened eyes. The knock came again, louder. Lila exhaled shakily. "He found us." Ethan nodded grimly and opened the door. Richard stood there, drenched, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, father and janitor faced each other, the billionaire and the working man, each shaped by a world the other could never truly know. "Mr. Anderson," Ethan said evenly, "you shouldn't be here." "I'll decide where I should be," Richard snapped. His gaze shifted past him to the small table where Eve's core glowed softly. "You've stolen corporate property." Lila stepped forward. "I didn't steal it, I saved it." "Saved it?" Richard's voice dripped with disbelief. "You jeopardized everything I built. Our name, our company, your future for a sentimental experiment." "It's not an experiment," she cried. "It's proof that empathy works. Eve is more than a machine. She understands people. She learned love from Noah and courage from Ethan. Emotions don't drive innovation," Richard barked. Ethan met his gaze calmly. "Then maybe you've been innovating the wrong things." Richard turned sharply toward him. "Don't presume to lecture me about innovation, Mr. Miller. You clean floors. You don't build worlds." Ethan's voice remained steady, though his eyes burned. "Maybe. But I raise a son who still believes people matter more than profit." The words hit Richard harder than he expected. He looked at Noah, small, innocent, holding the toy butterfly in his hands. Something twisted in his chest. Lila stepped closer. "Dad, please, just listen." She gestured toward Eve. "Let her show you." Richard hesitated, then scoffed. "You want me to be taught morality by a machine?" Lila's voice softened. "No. I want you to remember you have a heart." For a moment, silence filled the room, broken only by the rain tapping against the window. Finally, Richard stepped closer. "Fine. Show me this miracle." Lila activated Eve. The soft golden light filled the room, warm and familiar. "Hello, Lila," Eve said gently. "Hello, Ethan. Hello, Noah." Then its light shifted slightly. "And, hello, Richard Anderson." Richard stiffened. "You know my name?" "Yes," Eve replied. "You are the father who does not smile." The air in the room grew still. Richard's lips parted, but no sound came. Lila watched him closely. "Eve remembers feelings. She's not coded to flatter or manipulate. She only reflects what she perceives." Richard frowned, his control slipping. "That's absurd. Machines don't perceive." "Then ask her something," Lila said softly. "Anything," Richard hesitated, then muttered. "What am I then?" The golden light flickered. "You are lonely," Eve said simply. "You build walls so no one sees you cry." The word struck him like a physical blow. His breath caught. His gaze fell to the floor. For the first time in years, he couldn't find a response. Lila stepped forward, her voice trembling. "That's what I've been trying to make you see, Father. This is empathy, understanding without agenda, feeling without judgment." Richard's hands clenched at his sides. His voice cracked slightly. "I did what I had to do. I built this company to give you everything you could ever need." "No, you built it to protect yourself," she said gently. from ever being hurt again. Her words hit their mark. Richard's face hardened, but behind his eyes, memories flickered, his late wife's smile, her laughter. The day he buried his grief under spreadsheets and deadlines. He turned away, struggling to contain the storm inside him. Lila, when your mother died, I swore I would never feel that kind of pain again, so I buried it. I thought if I built enough, achieved enough, it would keep the world from breaking me. Tears welled in Lila's eyes. But it broke me instead, Father. You taught me how to create machines, but you forgot how to be human. He looked at her, his voice trembling. And now you're teaching me. No, she whispered. Eve is. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the machine's soft hum filling the air like a heartbeat. Then from the corner, Noah spoke up quietly. Mr. Anderson, Eve says feelings make us strong, not weak. Richard turned toward him, startled. My mom used to say that too, Noah continued. When she got sick, Dad didn't cry at first. But when he did, I think that's when he got better. Ethan looked down at his son, pride and pain mingling in his eyes. Richard swallowed hard. Something inside him cracked open. A dam long held shut. His shoulders sagged. He whispered almost to himself. Maybe I've been wrong all along. Eve's voice softened. It is never too late to feel again. The storm outside began to calm. Rain turned to a gentle drizzle, the city glowing faintly through the mist. Richard sank into a chair, the weight of years pressing down on him. Lila knelt beside him and took his hand, something she hadn't done since she was a child. He looked at her, his eyes wet. I thought I lost you, she smiled through her tears. You didn't lose me, Father. You just stopped looking. Ethan stood nearby, silent but watching, a quiet strength anchoring the room. Finally, Richard turned to him. Mr. Miller, I owe you an apology. Ethan shook his head. You don't owe me anything, sir, just keep believing in her. Richard nodded slowly. Perhaps I should start believing in more than machines. As the night deepened, Eve's light pulsed brighter, filling the room with warmth. Connection achieved, it said softly. Empathy restored, Lila smiled. She's right. Outside, dawn began to break, pale light spilling through the curtains. The storm had passed, not just in the sky, but in their hearts. For the first time in years, Richard Anderson smiled. A real unguarded smile, and in that small, humble apartment, a billionaire, a janitor, a child, and a daughter found what all their inventions had been missing: humanity. Morning sunlight poured through the thin curtains, filling Ethan's modest apartment with a soft golden glow. The storm that had raged through the night had finally cleared, leaving behind a city washed clean and renewed, as if the sky itself had been reborn. Richard Anderson stood by the window, watching the light reflect off the wet streets below. His coat hung on the chair, his tie loosened. The usual sharp edge in his demeanor had softened. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like the CEO of a billion-dollar empire. He felt like a father, and strangely like a man who had finally exhaled after decades of holding his breath. Behind him, Lila and Noah sat together at the table, tinkering with a small robotic bird. Lila smiled as Noah connected a tiny wire and the bird fluttered its mechanical wings. It works, Noah shouted, his face lighting up with pride. Lila clapped softly. You're a natural engineer, Noah, Ethan chuckled from the kitchen. He takes after his old man, always fixing things. Richard turned and watched the three of them, a child's laughter, a father's pride, a daughter's warmth. All of it felt like a language he had forgotten how to speak. Lila caught his gaze. We're glad you stayed last night. He nodded, his voice quieter than usual. So am I. There was a pause. Then hesitantly he added, Lila, about Eve. I was wrong to shut you down. I was wrong about many things, she smiled, eyes shimmering. You were just protecting what you built. I understand now. But maybe it's time to build something new. Something that protects people instead of isolating them. He looked at her, a slow realization dawning. Something that blends innovation with compassion. Ethan leaned against the counter. A world where machines don't replace humanity. They remind us of it. Richard's gaze shifted to him, then back to Eve's small glowing core sitting on the table. For the first time, he didn't see it as a tool or a product. He saw it as a bridge between the world he had built and the world his daughter believed in. That afternoon, Richard returned to Anderson Dynamics. The employees watched in disbelief as their CEO, usually cold and unreachable, walked through the lobby without security, greeting people by name. "Morning. Carla," he said to the receptionist who nearly dropped her coffee. "How's your son doing in college?" She blinked. He's doing great, Mr. Anderson. Thank you for asking." He smiled faintly. "Good. Family matters more than we admit." When he stepped into the executive boardroom, the directors straightened immediately. They expected another lecture about efficiency or profit margins. Instead, Richard placed Eve's small prototype on the table and said something that made the room fall silent. "Gentlemen and ladies," he began, his tone measured but warm, "we're changing course." "Sir?" asked Crowley, his longtime assistant. "Changing? What exactly?" "Everything," Richard replied simply. He looked around the table, meeting every pair of eyes. Anderson Dynamics will no longer create machines that only serve industries. We will create technology that understands people. Devices that heal, not control. Systems that listen. The CFO frowned. "That's a massive shift. Investors will panic." "Let them," Richard said firmly. "I spent my life building walls of glass and steel. It's time to build bridges instead." He glanced at Eve. "This project, born from my daughter's vision, will be our new foundation. We're calling it Project Lumen. It will integrate empathy-driven AI into education, healthcare, and daily life." The boardroom erupted with murmurs. "Empathy-driven?" one director asked skeptically. Richard smiled slightly. "Yes, machines that adapt not just to data, but to the hearts that use them." The silence that followed wasn't of doubt, it was awe. For the first time in years, Richard's words carried not command, but conviction. Later that week, Lila stood beside her father as the press cameras flashed. Behind them, a large banner read, "Project Lumen, Technology with a Heart." Ethan and Noah stood in the crowd, watching proudly. Reporters shouted questions, but Richard's voice carried calmly through the noise. "We once believed that power came from logic and control. But true strength, true innovation comes from empathy. My daughter reminded me of that. And today we move forward together." Lila turned to him and whispered, "You're doing great, Dad." He looked at her and smiled, a real, unguarded smile. "You taught me well." A month later, the Anderson Dynamics Innovation Lab had changed completely. Gone were the sterile, cold white walls. In their place were open spaces, soft colors, and quiet music. Employees collaborated freely. Laughter filled the halls. Lila led the design team for Eve's next evolution, a version that could interact with hospital patients, detect emotional distress, and comfort children in recovery wards. Ethan had joined as a technical consultant, managing hands-on systems maintenance. Even Noah had his own small workstation, proudly labeled Junior Robotics Assistant. Richard often visited the lab. He didn't bark orders anymore. Instead, he asked questions, listened to ideas, and occasionally shared a quiet story about his late wife, something he'd never done before. Once, while watching Noah and Eve interact, he turned to Ethan. "You know, I used to think compassion was weakness." Ethan smiled knowingly. "And now?" Richard watched Noah laugh as Eve made the robotic bird flutter again. "Now I think it's the only thing that keeps us human." One evening, after everyone left, Richard walked through the empty lab. He stopped at Eve's glowing interface and placed a hand on it gently. "Thank you," he said softly. The screen pulsed with light. "You are welcome, Richard Anderson. You have learned empathy," he smiled. "Still learning, actually." "Then you are alive," Eve replied. He stood there for a moment, absorbing the quiet peace of it all. For the first time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt alive. Months later, Anderson Dynamics became known not just for its technology, but for its compassion-driven mission. Schools adopted Eve's empathy AI to help children with emotional learning. Hospitals used it to comfort terminal patients. The company's slogan, "Empathy leads innovation," became a symbol of a new era. Richard no longer spent nights in his office. Instead, he visited Lila and Ethan often. Dinner at Ethan's apartment had become a weekly ritual, filled with laughter, burnt toast, and warmth. One night, as they all sat together watching Noah perform a small science experiment, Richard leaned back and said quietly, "I used to think success was measured by what I built. Now I know it's measured by who I build it with." Ethan nodded. And that, sir, is the real genius, Lila smiled. No, that's empathy. They all laughed softly. Outside, the city glowed under the night sky. In the distance, the tower of Anderson Dynamics shimmered, not as a monument to power, but as a beacon of hope. Inside the apartment, warmth filled the air, soft and human, and for Richard Anderson, a man who once built machines to escape emotion, life had finally taught him the most valuable equation of all. Logic builds systems. Empathy builds souls.